Hey, this is Sandra coming to you direct from Hayward, California, the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area, where I was born and raised. Who I am in a nutshell. I am a first-generation Chicana in the U.S., also the first in my family to go to college. My parents are immigrants from Mexico. I have a bachelor's degree in Chicano Studies from UC Berkeley and my master's degree in counseling from Cal State Hayward. I have been a California community college counselor for the past 20 years. I provide academic, career, and personal counseling in one-on-one sessions, as well as in college success courses. In these Brown Bag podcasts, my intention is to share my experiences working with my community and my college students. You will meet some of my mentors and awesome colleagues who have motivated me to continue doing the work that I do.
Hello, my name is Monique Williams. I am currently an English instructor at Chabot College. I work with the Olmedo program. I am the tri-chair of the Student Access, Success, and Equity Committee, and I am a member of the CCEPG. I was born and raised in Hayward, California, and I am a proud Chabot College graduate. I earned a BA from Mills and an MA from San Francisco State, but I never left Chabot. It's my home. And I have been a part of the institution in many different ways. I've been a student, an administrator, and now I'm a teacher. I have had the privilege of seeing the college through 3 different lenses. I joined the Brown Bag podcast because of the 2 women I get to be in conversation with, Sandra and Carmen. These women, with a lot of care, teach me more about how to best serve the Chabot College community. I hope listening to this podcast will give you the same opportunity for growth that each conversation with these women gives to me.
What's up, everyone? It's Carmen Johnston, aka Mrs. J, aka Queen Carmi, aka DJ Carm Brulee, here and ready to build knowledge with my 2 amazing co-hosts. I am a Black woman born and bred in the Bay Area. I am a proud Gen Xer, radiant English professor, and pop culture enthusiast. I have a bachelor's in liberal studies and master's in English creative writing, both from San Francisco State University. I've worn several hats at Chabot College, ranging from co-founding the Change It Now learning community to co-leading the Chabot Collaborative for Equity and Professional Growth. Mostly, though, I'm interested in transformation by holding space for difficult conversations that will ultimately move us all closer to a more equitable college and more just world.
Welcome to the Brown Bag podcast. We're talking today about what it means to be an HSI campus. Thankfully, Dean Patton and Monique Williams have joined us to talk about that conversation. And of course, Carmen is here to talk about that conversation. Just like always, what we're going to do is start with what's giving you life before we get into like the heavy topics of what this campus can do. Right? We're going to talk about what's giving us life. And so who has something giving you life right now?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. What's giving me life is I'm knee deep in my dissertation work. And although it's like overwhelming, my topic I'm really excited and passionate about. That was my last visit to this podcast was actually to talk about diversity in hiring, which is what my dissertation topic is. So I just love learning what's out there in terms of best practices and, institutional change and culture change to be more open, ready, and willing to bring in candidates of color. So overwhelmed, but I'm also really excited about it. And that is giving me life right now.
Abby, why didn't you apply for being president?
I know. So we have been telling you.
I was like, wait a second.
You could apply.
I appreciate that. But I need to finish this dissertation.
Okay.
And then she's like, sky's the limit. She was
this weekend typing really fast.
We gotta hurry. But thank you. Appreciate that question. Make sure to put that out in the podcast. Thank you.
For president, take that out so nobody starts making t-shirts.
Right.
Next round. Next time. Whenever
next round.
I should have terms, not like the president's like Right? I don't know.
All right, what's giving everybody else life? Me, I'm getting life from coffee right now. That's all I got. 4:00, I'm drinking another cup of coffee. It's probably my fourth today. My heart's gonna explode.
Jumping off the wall.
That's what's giving me life. How about you, Carmen or Monica? It's giving you life.
For me, I think this weekend was a good one. I mean, I think, what weekends are supposed to do, I guess, give you life, regenerate. My son, he came out in a 15. So he was one of the chavalales. And I was like, oh my God, like just watching him like go through that, like the practices, like 3 or 4 hour practices twice a week. And then seeing him go through I haven't been in a 15 in years because of the whole pandemic too. Since I was like, it's been a while. So it was really nice to see him do that. And kids, like the high schoolers dancing and it was just a really nice party. So it's nice to see him come, even though his stomach was hurting like a few hours or a few minutes before the show was going to start. He's like, my stomach hurts. And I'm like, okay, like you could do it, and yeah, he did it. So it's kind of nice to see him participating in little things like that. And I'm like, okay.
It's super fancy now with the bailes, right? Like I'm like, oh my gosh, have you seen a quince baile? They go all out, like
yes.
We used to just do the thing where you sway back and forth and then make a little bridge.
Yes,
now they do a real thing.
They have a whole dance routine and everything,
and changing of outfits and everything. I was like, wow.
Yeah, you had to go like this with the girl, like the like this and. They did leapfrog at some point. I was like, wow.
It's like a big deal.
They had like little fireworks in the back. Like, Jesus, like,
wow.
Yeah. But yeah, it was fun. It was a good time.
I think what's giving me life right now are boundaries. Yeah, being able to say no and figure out what I want to do and what I don't want to do, and kind of being able to say that, and then just trying to get better at people's feelings about the boundaries. I mean, that's the thing that they don't tell you. You set a boundary and then people have a lot of feelings about it. And then you just have to kind of cope with their feelings. But it's nice when you set a boundary and, you get support for it too. Yeah, I feel like setting boundaries and just kind of just getting more clear about like what I want from my life. That's giving me life these days.
Nice. All right. So I think the first thing to start out with, right, we're talking about being an HSI, like what does that mean? And so from you guys, what does that mean? A lot of people don't know. They just hear that we have this HSI grant, we're an HSI institution, but what does that really mean to you? What do you hope that people kind of like think about when they hear that term?
So, I mean, technically, it means you have 25% or more students that are Latinx. And that also includes low-income students past the 25%. So we were at 25% about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then since then, since I think 2015, we were at 35%. In the last few years, we've been between 41% for the last like 5 years. And we haven't moved past the 41%, but still kind of rocketing in between. But that's the technical term. For me, being an HSI means that we are ready to serve our Latinx student population, that we know that it's a population that is in high need of additional layers of support because we are not ready as an institution to serve our students of color in general, right? And so in California and California community colleges across the board, you've seen huge spikes of increase of diversity. And it's great that we have more students of color at our community colleges. At the same rate, we also see our students of color are decreasing in our most selective institutions like our UCs, right? And so we need to make sure that we can also graduate the students and that we can also, provide the support that they need to be successful at the college, to help them transfer or find the employment that they want to pursue after college. So even though we're way past the 25% mark at this point, and actually we're at 55% if you include low income students. So it's more than the majority of the college. For me, I think really an HSI institution incorporates us being very mindful about how we're serving the population of Latinx students that we have, and also being open to our community. And we have 60% of the population in Hayward is Latinx. So we want to also make sure that as a community college, we're serving the families, we're serving the siblings, we're serving the students that are coming to our college.
And I'd like to add that when we think of our institution, right, and the way it was built and the organization of it, it wasn't meant to have Latino students, right? So then that's almost like a shape that doesn't, like, how do we like take a triangle and put a circle in it, or because it was designed to not serve certain students, but now the students are here. So how do we redesign a system that hasn't been created for that, right? And then one of my favorite definitions, I think, that makes sense to me was that, like, you know, when students have a strong identification with an organization, then that increases their individual outcomes, including a sense of belonging, satisfaction, performance, because it is assumed that students who have a strong identification with an identity for serving Latino are likely to be more satisfied and have a sense of belonging, right? Potentially leading to academic outcomes such as graduation. And you know, those of us that are classroom teachers, we know that, right? When a student feels welcome in your classroom, they're going to do better, right? They're going to succeed and complete your course and meet all your outcomes, right? I think that's also one of the definitions that to me makes sense. Like, you know, how do they do they feel like accepted in these and all the different spaces we have on campus, not just in the classroom, right? We tend to focus on curriculum in the classroom.
I'm glad that
right?
you brought up the piece, Monica, about the schools not being designed for Latinx students, because I was with a group of folks this weekend talking about class and education and sharing with them just kind of all these different historical examples of how, for all groups of color, really, you know, and I'd say even particularly Black and Latino folks, that education did not have us in mind, right? And like they actually did a lot to try to keep us from having an education. And so I'm curious, when you're thinking about HSI and like designing, you know, the system better for Latinx students, what does that actually look like? And can you talk about how in this design of thinking about Latinx students, that is also going to serve all students, either one of you? So I think a lot of times people think like, oh, if something's HSI or for Latinx students, that it's just for them, and like that it's going to help other students as well. And I just, would love to hear your guys' thoughts about that.
Yeah, I love the question. Thank you. So I'm thinking about like Dr. Gina Garcia's, and I'll share her book so that we can put it at the end for folks to look at. We're actually going to bring her on campus August 25th, and it's going to be a whole day event, being able to engage the campus on how do we go from enrolling HSI students to really serving HSI students, which is something that you hear about a lot, right? I think there's a movement across HSIs to consider what servingness looks like. And she talks about these like academic self-concept, these non-cognitive things. So we already know that, and Monica mentioned some of this in the classroom, being culturally responsive to Latino culture, right? Whether it be you're teaching a book or you're referencing a Latino author or you're talking about Latino history in your history class, et cetera. All those are being culturally responsive. But there's also the non-cognitive aspects of it, which is like the academic self-concept, the leadership identity. Like, do we give opportunities for our Latino students to show up as leaders across our campus? Do we recognize that we are a largely Latino school? And does this mean, like, what is our racial identity of the campus as well, right? Do we have signage in Spanish? Do we like have, you know, our promotional materials in Spanish, but also like, do we celebrate Latinx culture outside of like Latino related events? You know, also the critical consciousness. So there's different ways that I think you can show all of these non-cognitive aspects of supporting Latino students. And some of that we do really well, like being the founding college for Puente, right? And Puente being like our I think a marker of excellence for Latinx students and serving Latinx students is a really prime example. But the capacity has been an issue of how do we build out those services. And so the HSI grant has allowed us now to like have a center that is bilingual, where students can come, family members can come. We have like these beautiful, you know, art outside of El Centro that like says, you know, we're happy to be a Latinx serving institution. We recently came out with our HSI serving logo, right? That has like that gives the campus some identity around that. And so there's always questions about like, so then does this mean that a Black student might not feel welcomed, or an Asian student might not feel welcome. And I think part of what you're saying, Carmen, is we know that when we are intentional about serving a racially minoritized group that has been disproportionately impacted, it will ultimately support the entire campus. And I'll just give an example of, me thinking about how do we increase the number of Latinx faculty and Latinx administrators and Latinx classified professionals at our campus to be more representative with our student population. And the data shows that when you have a faculty member of color, it's not only the Latino students who benefit, it's not only, our students of color, it's also our white students that will benefit from having a faculty of color. It will also be, the whole campus that will benefit from having a administrator of color. And so for me, it's really important to differentiate. It doesn't mean that you come into this work saying we're going to serve all students, because then we lose the intentionality of serving our Latinx student population. It's being apologetic and staying committed to serving the Latinx student population that will definitely trigger, and El Centro is a prime example of it. We get students from all walks of the community. And we get students, for example, a lot of ESL students go to El Centro, and we don't speak any other language but Spanish, but they know that there's going to be a space where they can walk in. They'll calmly provide more support. They'll try to, do some hands-on work with them. And it's not whether or not they speak the language or not, they see El Centro as a space that they can come into and feel welcome.
Do you want to add anything, Monica?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things, again, I got to go to a conference in March where Gina Garcia was also the featured keynote speaker, because she just got a new book out. And then some things, some of the things that I highlighted right now, are just right now, I don't know how we feel about where Chabot is exactly, but, sometimes it's just enrolling, but it's also this next step would be educating and then empowering students, right? Kind of like what Abby was talking about, and other students of color through a culturally embracing approach of this, being an HSI, people embracing that title. So it's not just also Latino, but other students of color as well. And I think sometimes it goes down to best practices too. If you have something that works with Latino students, chances are it's going to work for everybody, because it's just a good practice. That kind of, that hidden curriculum they talk about, or the visible curriculum, right? All that stuff, you're kind of making it more clear to students, because again, many times their families have not gone to college. They don't know the college system. It's also about that, making it more tangible for students, because again, they're probably the first in their family to go to college. They also mentioned stuff like the validity of experience with students, try to think of what that means exactly. Validity of experience with students. So making sure that they feel validated as well. And then of course, there's also the outcomes. I think Abby also touched upon that, GPA, course completion, 6-year graduation rates, college completions, transfer. In our case right now with the HSI STEM, it's also STEM. We're also supposed to increase Latinos in STEM, but then also seeing their post-baccalaureate and also the labor market. How are they doing after? Do we just transfer them and we don't know what happens to them? And then I think Abby mentioned some of these too already, the non-academic outcomes, such as their racial identity, having a critical consciousness. And I think we do that a lot as well as even in our English department, right? Actually knowing their academic self as well. Those are other things that have to do with servingness.
I think that there are definitely, you pointed out, El Centro, and the ways in which, it doesn't just serve HSI students, but it's serving everybody. And also just kind of this visibility and feeling of home. And I think that that's so, it really is very, very important for our students if we want them to stay here and complete here and to, and to actually feel a necessity to be here, something it actually adds to their success, that these spaces exist, right? And that they know that they exist. But what often worries me is that they kind of exist in a space, but then we don't see it on the larger campus, right? So if I'm coming here and I'm really involved in the sciences, unless I really talk to somebody, and this happened in Umoja a lot too, right? Unless I really talked to somebody who was a kind of supporter of the program, or students kind of bumped into someone, right? And they'd be like, did you know about, right? Then it kind of doesn't get everywhere, because it's not the campus hasn't accepted it as their responsibility. Right. And I'm wondering, are you seeing similar things? You need the campus to accept it as a responsibility, or do you feel we have that and there's some other need?
I mean, I think that that's part of what we're working on as well. Like, how do we all accept that and embrace, your HSI identity? And it's a responsibility, again, because this is like more than half your audience, right? Possibly. So are we really like working with that population? So I think, yeah. And then the other part too that is missing too, do students know that this is an HSI? do they know that I go to an HSI school? Like, I think like, right. I think sometimes students would feel more comfortable if they knew they're an HSI school that's gonna like watch out for them, and have them feel like, yeah, that the people are working for them, right?
Yeah. I when I was HSI director, I think part of the grant was incorporating some math faculty and supporting students in the math development piece, especially when we had the assessments, right? And so we had math being the bottleneck course where it was hard for students to pass math, and students would, fail out because of that or leave campus because they felt like I'm not meant to be a student because I can't do math. And, so part of the HSI grant was supposed to address some of that. And then it was also working with the Ethnic Studies department, which was, really great to be able to like provide programming and expand our Ethnic Studies offerings. And we created a FIG through the HSI grant. So there were markers of like trying to build out institutional change around supporting our Latinx students through the HSI grant. I think that's one of the things that the HSI grant offers us is, even if our HSI grant, in 4 years or 3 years now, once it ends and we'll get another HSI grant. But even if we don't, we still are an HSI serving institution, right? Like we still are a Hispanic serving institution. But this money does give us opportunities to do things that we wouldn't otherwise. So this particular grant, the Title III grant, is a true partnership with academic services. So there's the student services component that's, supporting El Centro, that's supporting the celebration of Latinx culture and different programming events. And then there's that tie to the science and math department because of the STEM piece. And so we have a co-PI. We have Katie Messina Silva, who was one of our co-PIs, and then Dan Quigley, who's our other PI, whose task is to support the programming of Latinx students in STEM and to also can make the connection to industry partners, to also provide activities to support these students better, to help with some of the outreach and recruitment piece. And then there's a whole I think it's 20 faculty in STEM, science and math that are involved in our student success team for the HSI grant. So this grant in particular feels, one, it's bigger. It's twice the amount. We got $2.5 million with Title V. This grant is $1 million a year, right? So it's twice as big as the other one was. And it also is twice as big in terms of who is involved and how we're involved in campus and the community. So in that respect, that has been really nice for me to see, being the HSI director and getting a lot of support from campus, but still feeling like it was something that was relegated to student services to now being really cross campus. But, you also do find the gaps in knowledge of folks and I think you mentioned this earlier of how to get involved and how to serve and how to also be able to be involved in not only the HSI activities, but also to mentor Latinx students and so I think I definitely see that there's folks who might say this is something that Monica does as the HSI director, or this is something that El Centro does. But I think more and more so we're finding Dr. Forbes is really involved with the HSI grant. I'm in academic services now really involved with the HSI grant. And then there's Clea that is also on a large scale supporting all the work of programming and events for Latinx students. So it's definitely a grind to get folks to understand and grasp that. And I do think that it's also, and we've talked about, Monica is going to be working this summer on creating an HSI landing page, right, to provide more communication and be more clear with folks about how they can get involved and also just have a good understanding of where we're at with the HSI grant. Because I think most people, if you ask them like, what's happening with the HSI grant, I don't even know that most people could tell you, oh, there's an HSI STEM grant versus an HSI development grant, which is the first one that we received, right? So it's also about how we're sharing that information.
So there are some people who are going to want to get involved in big ways, right? Like, how organized people create figs and stuff like that, right? But there are other people, like it's like you have a myriad of lives, right? What are some of the ways, like really deep and big, that people can get involved? But then there's some ways that you're like, if you just do this, like, like I don't need you to come to every meeting, or I don't need you, right? But if you just did this, it would put us more on a path to actually serving Latinx students on campus. So can you give some advice in that way?
Well, we also have the HSI Advisory Council that meets, maybe once a semester right now, is where we've been able to, with everyone's plate really full. And then I just came on, learning this role too. And I've learned from other HSI directors too, that it does take about a year just to get to know the grant and just to figure out how does it work at your school and then how the pieces fall together. So it's also a lot of learning on that part, but we do have that. I mean, little ways. For instance, we did the carnitas and citations workshop. So we married okay, I know citations is something that students struggle with. As an educator, and it's research time, and what are some ways that we motivate students and get them back on track with academics. And carnitas, of course, it's a very popular dish for Latinos, so it's a way to just catch their eye. But
not mine. I don't want some carnitas.
It's really good, right?
Yeah. Every time I look at the flyer, I'm like, is the date coming up again?
Exactly.
I gotta do it in the fall, And I was nervous about the timing because I'm like, was it late? But students, research papers at the end, that kind of stuff. But the librarian came by. Not Pedro, Eugenia, I'm trying to think of her.
Mm-hmm. Eugenia.
Yeah. I was like, I'm like, great. So she just popped in, and then we talked really quick, and they brought handouts to me, and we kind of looked at the, we added that to the agenda, basically, to kind of then show what the library offers as well. And so the next time we're gonna collaborate a little bit more to kind of connect the so that students know where to go as well. So that was just a small, quick, a person just popped in and, and I'm already thinking of the next one, right? And then, I don't know how you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone can provide a sense of whether it be belonging, affirmation, validation of the Latinx student experience in their classroom, right? So if we start that small, you might have, your math teacher talk about the history of math with our indigenous folks in Mexico and how it originated and how powerful it is for students to understand that. And I could see this, for our Black students also, right? To be able to understand the rich history that we have in connection to academics, that sometimes it's completely kind of washed away and imperialized and whitenized in many of our academic spaces, right? So even just starting that, if maybe your connecting point or whatever, your warm up can be something to talk about, Cinco de Mayo just passed. What is the real history of Cinco de Mayo? Even if you're teaching whatever you're teaching, right? If you're teaching engineering or whatever it is, you could have a warm up that at least allows the student to then feel connected. Oh, he acknowledged that Latinx somewhat. I mean, it's not really a holiday, and I'm not going to spend any time.
I was like, do you want to talk about that? Because it's not.
No, but what I would like to talk about is demystifying what Cinco de Mayo actually is, right? That's what I would like. That would be the time that I would take to say, y'all know that Cinco de Mayo is just to get you all to buy stuff and they're commercialized. So I think there's those small things that I think are incredibly tangible for an instructor. And then there's other things that are still going to, not necessarily, you don't even have to say Latinx, although it would be great to, but even talking about family stuff, right? Recognizing the students' lived experiences in your classroom go a long way with Latinx students as well with other students, right? Mm-hmm. So I think those pieces are clear pieces of how you can move from just going to your daily task of, lecturing or teaching to providing the student with some relational piece of, I'm here for you. I care about you. I care about where you come from and what you're doing. Right. And I know we talk about this often. You know, the same thing as a classified profession or as an administrator. Like when I see students roaming around, I'm like, what's your name? What school do you come from? Like, I want to learn about them and not just have a transaction with them, right? And so again, these are, you ask for small things. And so I was thinking, like, what are things that are super easy for folks to kind of move on? And then there's big pieces, like you could join the HSI STEM SST, right? The student success team. And now we're having student success teams for all our other pathways. And so although this isn't specific for Latinx students, I think our goal is to disaggregate data by race, right? To see where our students are in each of our pathways. And so this is important, like being race conscious and talking about race openly in our spaces about how our populations are doing in particular pathways is critical for us to be able to make any ground and any improvements throughout the college. And that to me is big picture, right? That to me is when we're getting from thinking about the niceness of like colorblindness and allness and, you know, universalisms and all of those nice things to real work around thinking about who our students are and what their needs are.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys have any advice on, because like, I know that we're often butting up against that, like this, you know, people don't want to talk about race because they feel like they're going to be perceived as racist because they don't know how to talk about race or they don't know particular culture. And so all they know are the assumptions that they've made about that culture. And that's what usually comes out. Like, what is your advice to people who are very uncomfortable about talking about Latinx students, like specifically talking about race, talking about culture? What is your advice to them so that they can become more comfortable talking about this directly rather than this colorblind, like you said, the nice thing? I just see your potential. I don't see where you come from. Well, thank you. That's, you're just dissing all my people.
I'm going to take a page from Carmen's book here, but you have to know who our students are. Like, there's no excuse for not understanding the student population that we serve, for understanding, you know, some of the challenges that our students might experience. But I want to make it really clear that this is not, whenever you say something is the fault of the student, then you're moving away from understanding the student, right? Mm-hmm. There's a continuum of like, I understand that, you know, in Latino culture, we might have like a parent who didn't, like my dad didn't want me to go to college. He didn't want me to go to college not because he didn't think it was going to be good for me, but because he didn't believe that it was a good space for me. He, you know, this is when we talk about liberatory spaces, like my dad knew that if I went to college, I was going to be in a white space, and I was going to have to acclimate. I was going to have to throw my culture out the window. And it was only because I found spaces on campus where I was like able to ground myself and stay connected to my culture. And I ended up joining a Latina sorority because of it, because I'm like, we're all the Latinos that, you know, at Cal. So I think, you know, so, but understanding, but not saying, you know, my dad's perception of my experience in college was not because he didn't want the best for me. It was because he wanted the best for me.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about our students and think about, you know, their experiences as deficit, they actually bring so much capital to the conversation. You know, when we talk about students that are that come with two languages. I mean, there's so many perceptions of now. I think it's more like, okay, it's great to learn two languages. Everywhere else in the world, we learn more than in one language, right? Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, here, when we have a third grader whose like main language is Spanish, we think they're not going to make it. And that's not true. I mean, I didn't learn English till I was in 4th grade, right? That was my first English-Spanish class or ESL class that I started when I was in elementary school. and it's carried me, I think, through all my careers. Like, I cannot imagine being able to connect with my colleagues, with my students, with people in our community if I didn't speak Spanish, right? And it's a huge cultural asset that I bring. So I think I went on a tangent, but my answer to that was, if you're thinking about all that you want to learn about Latinx culture, think about all the assets that our culture brings, which includes, like, we're huge on family. We protect our own, like, we make sure that we take care of people like we are. So all these are we have connections, right? We because we speak a different language, not all of us, but a lot of us, like, we navigate the world a little different. And these are all assets that we bring as a culture, and just stay away from making anything of the students' culture, those students' experience, as something that is deficit. These are all assets for our students.
Nice.
Yeah, it's one of those that even as an educator, I'm in those first maybe 2 months or something, I'm researching that student, like all my students, little assignments, quick writes, who are you? Because once I find that little thing that, maybe he was raised by his grandma, or there's got to be something in that student's life that then I hook on, and I'm there, like, and I will work way harder for that student, because now I see them as a person, because I know that thing about you, and that helps me to, like, then work harder in the classroom or in here, right? Because I know now you're a human. You're not just a student sitting in that class or walking in the center. I'm always kind of figuring out what makes you tick. And then it's going to be my job also that's what's going to make me tick too. Like, we're going to, so that when they are struggling, or when I find out that student's a dependent learner, not an independent one, because we have the independent ones that you just tell them once, this is what you got to do, and they'll go, right? There's the ones that are going to, that need more work. They need to work with you in lifetime, to sit with you and get that stuff done. And so that's also part of what we do, right? Making sure that who are your dependent students, and then working with them as well. So, and then also if sometimes you can't, like, for instance, something I wish I would have known as a English faculty, like, I wish I would have known more about el centro, like, because I do that intake survey of, like, have you completed this? Have you completed your FAFSA? Have you met with a counselor, or have you done this? So that if they didn't, then I can also kind of, like, start nudging them in that direction. Because I think I had one English student, like, I think it was my first summer here at El Centro, I was tabling out there. And one of my former English students came by, and he's like, I've taken everything. What am I doing now? And I'm like, what? It's like, I was in your English class, even, a long time ago. And I was like, oh, well, we can make you an appointment, because he would, like, really just lost. I've done everything. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, oh my God, he hasn't had he hasn't met with a counselor this whole time, doesn't know what to do. So it's like stuff like that I wish I would have added more in my Canvas side, or things like that, to, like, really, because we're just so busy teaching our subject that you forget about the whole student, so that source. I started to do some of that stuff, like inviting in a financial aid advisor to my classes, like, just give a quick, like, 5 to 10 minute presentation about financial aid, or where they can go get you, get help from you, that kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot of little stuff that.
What I hear from you, Monica, too, is just this idea of humanizing our students, right? And that's a lot of what the HSI movement can help us with, is how to really see our students as full people, and not just like these vessels that we are going to drop knowledge into, or just people we have to get through the finish line, right? But to really get to see them as full 3-dimensional people and connect to them, right? Because we know that students learn best when they feel connected and feel like they belong. And that's so much of our role as instructors, to create that space for them. And I wonder, if Chabot, was like super HSI'd out, and, like, was just like HSI too, we're about that HSI life. Like, what would that look like for you guys? Like, what would it look for Chabot to, like, be a full on, not just with the grants and the projects, but, like, that a student would walk in here and feel like, wow, this is a HSI serving institution. They can just feel it, What would that look like to you all?
For me is the whole cycle here, right? They come, they enroll. I think we're good at that. And then at the end, that they've finished whatever their goal was, but graduated and are doing well in their job, and feeling like they're, that their education meant something, because I still feel like some Latino students may graduate, get a BA, and they're still lost. Like they're not even using their degree, or they're still like, so I think once we actually have outcomes and numbers, and I think once students and families, we have to convince families too about, hey, going to Chabot really helped my child. Like now they're, in this career and doing XYZ, and they're right. And so I think once we get there, when we feel like our students, whether it's through work-based learning or internships or something like that, where they're actually like feeling the end result, because for a lot of our students, they have to provide for their families like now. Like even if I tell them you have to, if they get an education in 2 years or 4 years, they're going to be doing well for their families and they'll be able to provide for you. But the urgent need is now. Like they have to send money home now. Like they can't wait 2 or 3 years, because abuela's back home, or, we're sending a lot of money back and forth to different countries. So their families are like, yes, go get an education, but also you need to provide money for us now. Like, so once we can sell that dream to them that it's worth your time to study, or how do we balance that money part, for our students, whether it's, I don't know, like internships or but they have to pay well, or, you know what I mean? Like that's the urgency. I think that once we can let students know that they can make it through our system, then I'll feel like, okay, we're in HSI all the way, right?
Yeah, I agree, Monica. I think it is about our success rates, right? And making sure that our Latinx students and our Black students are succeeding at the same rate as or actually all succeeding, right? In both in course completion, but also in whatever their educational goal may be, whether it be transferring or whether it be employment. And I'm also reminded that 83% of Latinx students are first generation, right? And so when you think about what it means to be first generation, I squirm when people say, well, they're college students, so they should know. And I'm like, no, like who's gonna teach them if not you? Who's gonna teach them what does it mean to be a college student if not in a community college? Like this is an open access institution for a reason. And I think our mission and our values should always be that we are basically the first step for students' higher education. For the majority of Latinx students in Hayward, right? For the majority of Latinx students across California. And as such, we need to be able to say, we will walk you through, we will show you, we will provide you the skill sets, the soft skills to know how to navigate these institutions that, as we mentioned earlier, were not meant for you. But us working on that is actually breaking some of that cycle of this institution is not for you, right? And so I think that we need to be conscious of that. And Monica mentioned, that students graduate with their BAs and still go work at Starbucks because they don't know what to do, what else to do. And again, it's like when you are a first generation student, you're a first generation professional, and you'll be a first generation, master's and doctorate student. And all of this is still new for, especially for Latinx students. That's such a high population of them are first generation. So just wanted to bring that up. And then, for me, in terms of the non-academic pieces of being an HSI school, like we should have Spanish literature everywhere, right? We should have Spanish signs everywhere. And we should have better signage, period. I think it's really hard to get around this. And it's not a big campus, right? But it's still fairly hard to get around the campus. I also, I'm going to go back to like our hiring processes. Like I'd love for us to double down on saying we want faculty of color to come to this institution. Like we want and what does that look like? And so like I'm hoping that we can incorporate faculty cluster hires in the near future, right? That show like you want to work on this campus, show that you have experience working with Latinx and Black students. Like we want to see that level of intentionality. I also mentioned earlier about folks being race conscious. We need to talk about it is not okay for us to be scared to talk about race. And this goes from the bottom up, right? So, and a lot of it is just providing professional development opportunities for folks to feel comfortable. And the more we talk about it, and it's okay to make mistakes. I'd rather have somebody say, I know this is an assumption, but right, than not talk about race in general. So I think we need to make the idea of disaggregating data by race, of providing specific opportunities that are going to be conscientious of race, of talking about Black and Latinx students and not saying students of color so much, right? Because that also hurts what students we need to be intentional about serving. And I would throw out PI students in there. So these are the different opportunities that we have as a campus to make sure that we're asserting that we not only are looking to bring in Latinx students, but that we're valuing the students that are here. And because of that, we're going to know where our pitfalls, because it's our pitfalls, it's not their pitfalls, where our pitfalls are in terms of being able to serve them adequately so that they all succeed, so that they all graduate, they transfer, and they get their next career.
It's interesting when you're saying that, because we met with Juan Pablo to talk about like beautification on the campus and stuff. And, when you say like that there's not good signage on campus and there's no signage that's in Spanish, to me, what that says again is like another way of letting people know they don't belong, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's nothing here in your language. There's not even signage to help people get around. And it kind of reinforces that idea of that you're on your own. You got to just tough it and figure it out. And I don't think like, whoever's in charge of that, that's their intention. But I think that that's the messaging that you get. Like, just imagine being a student that's already on the borderline and you're coming here and trying to register and trying to find things and you can't because there's no signage. I mean, that really is not welcoming to you as a student. And I think in regards to the beautification, we talked about the new mural that's on the event center wall, right by El Centro. And that's really kind of the only imagery on this campus of people of color. I mean, I went to San Francisco State in the mid 90s and they just had put up this Malcolm X mural, which was like super controversial for some other reasons. But I just remember thinking how like, oh, okay, this is a place for me, and when you go into the student center, all the rooms were like, Dolores Huerta Hall, Toni Morrison room, or we don't have any of that. I'm like, why do our buildings have to be building 400? Why couldn't this be, I don't know, the Cesar Chavez building or the, I don't know, maybe there's local heroes in Hayward, that represent, but why don't we do that stuff? To me, it's just such a grounding in white supremacy, It's like, why aren't we doing these things to message to the students that this place is for them? And I feel like with us being at HSI Grant, that should fuel it even more. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, like, what is the hubbub? Like, what is holding us up here, Because it's just so... I don't know, like
it just takes a minute.
20th century, I guess.
It just takes a while. I think I heard Semenyo mention that he wanted to put like in the Cesar Chavez Plaza, like a mural. That was one of his.
Right, in the plaza that's named after.
Right, like that would make sense, right? Have a picture. But I think it's just the amount of energy and time and just to get that done, it just takes like a long time. Like I don't
actually know if it takes a long time though. I mean, I think about the mural that was up here. I mean, it didn't take a long time for them to organize and make it happen. Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do about organizing and has to do about, kind of building, a collective to do it. And it came from the students. And I think that was a big piece of it. So I don't know. I do think it, faculty are tired and exhausted and it does take a lot to like spearhead a project, but it just seems like that should just be the water that we're drinking, right? That's just as it is, that it shouldn't even require somebody to take it on. Like that should just be what's on the agenda out of facilities and technology. Hey, we're an HSI. How do we make this college more like an HSI? Like it just shouldn't be. So it's just, I think it's just straight up racism. I don't think it has anything to do with time or anything. I don't know, I'm going off, but
that's true. But
it's just racism.
A part of it is like this willingness, like both you and Abby talked about it, like this willingness to like educate yourself, right? So it's like somebody goes and they're like, oh, like building 400, blah, blah. There wasn't any intention around like excluding people when you name buildings that way, right? But there also isn't any intention to actually consider who we serve, right? And so like there's like it's not, the water is not being drank, right? And so like it's like there's not that intention connected to everything. And so then it takes a lot of education. Well, then what should the buildings be named? Why should they be named that? What is it going to do? What impact will that have, right? And so you have to be willing to enter a process of educating yourself, right? And then there's that other side of like vulnerability. You have a lot of people who are in charge of these things. Like, I mean, when we were trying to find who to interview for Latinx instructors, I was like, let me call it the 5 that I know.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, like it's not like this campus is like hopping with us, so it's like, that whole thing is like, okay, well, then you have a lot of people who have to be really vulnerable. Like even me, my Spanish is terrible. So like I'll bring something to class that's in Spanish. Like we did like a song, Los Tigres del Norte. We did songs by them. And I'm like, damn, I read the translation. I know it pretty good, right? I'm pretty good, but I have to let the students correct me, right?
Yeah, let them be the teachers. Yeah, let them be a teacher.
Yeah, I have to have them. I tell them like my Spanish is bad. So can you guys help me? I know that word's wrong, right? And so they'll help. But that's not how academia is set up, right? Like that's not how it's supposed to be. Teachers aren't supposed to go into a room and say, I don't really know. I'm trying to bring this in. I know it's important for all of us, but I also don't know that I know this, right? Yeah. And I think that ripples in all the different areas, maybe somebody wants to rename this building, but to a certain extent, they're scared. They don't know that they know it. Right. They don't know like what, right. And they're not really reaching out to figure that out and having that vulnerability. So it stops everything, right? This lack of vulnerability really kind of stops so much because really all they have to do is come and talk to people and be like, what should we name this building? I don't know, but I know I'm supposed to be intentional about it, but it takes a level of vulnerability, educating, all of that, right? It's a lot of effort, effort that should be made.
And it might be my next project.
Right?
I love it. I love
rename all these buildings.
Right. Well, and it is like it takes a lot of political will, like a lot of political savviness, being able to navigate those spaces, right? And there's like competing interests. So, it's like if I name one building, so it's Chavez building, like what am I going to name the other building? And am I making sure? So there's I think a lot of those conversations where it's like that takes a lot of courage, and rather than doing that, let's just name it a number, and then nobody's going to be like, hey, why didn't you name something, a Black figure or an Asian figure, right? It makes it easier. So I love that Carmen is going to take it up as her next project.
Change it now.
Yeah, change it now is going to be the name of the building. But I also think like I can't imagine how your students felt, Monique, when you were like, tell me how to read this, or tell me like I could only imagine like if I was an instructor in a classroom, the sense of pride that I would have that I'm able to impart knowledge in my classroom space, right? And students don't recognize that they impart knowledge all the time, unless the faculty member tells them, like, unless they say, you acknowledge, then you provide the space and you give them their accolades as they come. Like the students won't recognize that they have so much to bring forward.
Yeah. And it's kind of beautiful when we think about the ways in which we can collaborate if we actually talk about race everywhere, right? In the classroom, and because that's what we're teaching each other constantly if we're willing to have that conversation. It is political. It does get like, why didn't you name that building this? Why didn't you name that building that? But we don't want to talk about, oh, well, because this, the college is 60%, right? And so let's try, like, let's look at it like that. Or because we have underrepresentation here, but we know the community is this percent of, like, for example, PI. Like, a lot of our PI students go to San Mateo because we don't have representation here, right? But like, having those really critical conversations about race makes it, like, if we could have the conversations, it becomes less political and it makes more sense, right? More than just people grabbing up space or whatever, like, yeah. So I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard problem to solve, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I want to.
But also not that hard. We could just say,
just do it. I mean, I think a lot of it is just about whose comfort is centered. I mean, I think maybe people feel like I feel uncomfortable about it being Cesar Chavez, but there's some place where, like, it's not for you, though, like, this college isn't for us as faculty. This is for the students,
right? You don't
the
need
population that we serve. And so I feel like there's a lot of prioritizing our comfort as faculty, and a lot of white folks' comfort gets prioritized here, and not really thinking about our students of color and what they need to feel like they, that they belong and that this is a place for them. And us assuming a lot of what they need to feel that, right? So I think that, and then also, I mean, when you decide, and that's just another piece of that white supremacy of, like, that neutrality, right? That objectivity. I'll just name it. We'll just call it Building 400 because it's neutral and it's for everyone. But that is actually very exclusionary, and it does send a message to people when you do stuff like that. And I don't know, at those other colleges, they name them after the rich white people all the time, whoever paid for the wing. I ain't got no problem doing that, but I'm telling you guys, watch, give me about 5 years.
5 years.
Okay. And also, I'll be on the committee with you.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think it would actually be that hard. I think we could research Black, Latino, Asian folks in the Bay and Hayward that did some bomb stuff, put some proposals, go to facilities, make the rounds. I think we could do it. I don't think it's that hard, actually. Just the will.
Just to add to that, I think because a lot of the scholarship on HSI and on really exploring what that means right? I think a lot of that came in 2015 too. That was, people were doing more work on that. So I think it's only been like 7 years, even though, and by then all the population started to shift anyway too, because I don't know when Chabot started and what was the population then, right? So I think that's also on us to kind of, start like changing things around. Yeah. Even if it's I think you should be excited about Gina Garcia coming.
That's going to be great. And I hope we can get a lot of people to come and listen, and we can strategize on that.
She does say some interesting things too. Like, I mean, I didn't really I'll read everything down really. I mean, but even the whole DEI, right? She said that's not even enough, how we focus on. And she's saying that's not even enough. So I think that's what somehow we try to fix everything with that. And it's like, I think it goes beyond that too. But hopefully she'll share some of that.
Sometimes the DEI stuff allows us to do what, Abby, you were talking about, steer away from talking about Black students and Latin students and just talk about students that have had a tough time or whatever, and it really can dilute. When here we're trying to be intentional, especially because of our population. Hayward and Chabot, it's different that way, right? The other schools, maybe their population is smaller or even more diverse, right? More groups. But here it's very clear that we are a Latin institution. And what's interesting is, like, even when we say like the 60%, we're not counting people who, like me, are Black and Puerto Rican, right? Because I would count as Black, right? And so what do we get when we actually look at that, Well, I think it's time for our exit ticket, even though we could probably go on this.
There's so much to say.
We're changing building names. I want some of these bricks with quotes changed. I want some colors on these buildings. I'm like, every time my mom, she goes, "Why do you want to go to college? It just looks so boring." And I was like, "What do you mean it looks so boring? But we're Puerto Rican. Everything's supposed to be like turquoise and pink." It just looks so boring.
We can have some flavor though, right? I mean,
that'd be interesting.
Little pepper, little seasoning.
Color may making me hungry. I don't know what.
Carnitas in citations.
Tofu and citations.
We'll help you with your PhD answer, right? And your dissertation.
Hey, I need it. I need it.
So now we're at the
vegan. You're vegan. You can't.
Oh, you read the tofu and citations. Tofus and theses. How about that?
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
So now we're at the point where we do our exit ticket, and our exit ticket is just something that you want to recommend. You can recommend to the general population. It can be something that has to do with the conversation we had, or it can be just something that, like you just want to say, right? You want to give a shout out. So I don't know who wants to go first. What's your recommendation?
I'll stick to the theme, and I still want to watch it, but it's their Que Pasa HSI is a podcast also put together by Gina Garcia's group. So in case, I think there's student perspectives as well, things like that. So Que Pasa HSI. I hope we can see. I'm not I'll have to find it myself too, but.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think to prepare for Gina Garcia coming in August, she has a new book out, and so we're hoping to make like a community reading group with a book and just really engaging the whole campus community. So if folks want to know how to get involved, attend, participate, that's one way to get involved, and hopefully join the book club. And there's a lot of scholars around HSI, but Dr. Gina Garcia just happens to be the hot speaker around HSIs. And, I heard that she might be coming to Berkeley as a faculty member, so we might have her closer than Pennsylvania right now. So, yeah. So, maybe that will help us bring her more often, but it's
an emerging HSI too, Berkeley. So that'll be interesting to see. They like to take leadership on things. So now that they might become an HSI.
Cal Berkeley?
It's emerging. I think they're
like 15% emerging in like 20 years.
Yeah. Don't they need a lot more?
It's emerging. I mean, they're starting to do their research on it too. So I wouldn't be surprised that's why they want to bring it over there, because they're like, you need to come over to us. Yeah.
I think I'll go along with the theme, but also just something that you made me think of, Monica, and maybe a way for people to learn more is there are so many great YouTube videos, quinceañeras.
I love that.
And if you really know very little or have had little experience with Latinx culture, watch a quinceañera video, and you will see how much beauty, collective, the bailes, what is in there, right? And what kind of just the heart of it. I really haven't been to one in a long time, but I'm realize, I need to go watch some quinceañera videos to bring myself
for entertaining. The one that I put, Quince Bailes, that's TikTok, and it just shows all these extravagant Quince Bailes where I'm like, man, how did they're legit professional dancers dancing Quince Bailes.
Yeah, it shows you a lot about our community, right? They'll get this done and be beautiful and then celebrate. And it's, I don't know, it was really just a good time to dance with everybody and be there, and just a lot of family, a lot of community. That's really fun. But they're fun.
Wow. I don't know. I'm trying to stay in your guys' theme. I'm having a hard time thinking about it. Well, maybe what I recommend is this will be coming from more of an ally perspective. I would say if you like to eat Mexican food, learn how to make it yourself. That is my recommendation.
Don't learn from Rachel Ray.
I will tell you that there is a big trend for a while about quesadilla. And I learned how to make it, and I make it very good.
Really?
Oh yeah, I make some really good quesadilla. I do with beef, so it's not like the birria, right, with the goat, but it's very good. And it just turned me on. I'm like, let's learn how to make Mexican food more. So I know how to make like the enchilada sauce. And I think Pedro was like, if you can make that, that's gold. That's everything. You know?
You can get married already, Carmen.
I know how to make it. So I want to like make it and like freeze it and have it. So I feel like I can make Mexican food, and it's like my top food. So I'm excited about that. So I recommend learn how to cook it for yourself.
Yeah, Carmen, it's no joke. That's hella intricate. I'm like so impressed that you know how to make it.
Well, I did use an Instapot, so
I love Instapot.
There's a lot to it. You know, you got to toast the chilies, and you got to toast spices, and put the moisture back in the. You know, it's a lot of steps to it. It is.
Your whole kitchen turns red after a while.
I know it's really, so messy.
Everybody's crying.
Hands and everything.
Everyone's crying.
Don't breathe right now.
But it's good. It's really good. So I like to make it for. Like I make gumbo for Christmas, and that's like a big kind of thing. So I like to make quesadilla on like fair, you know, big things of celebrating people. It's cool because it's so much work, right?
A lot of work. Well, thank you guys. It's been great talking to you, and I think that I hope that we can become the serving part much more, and that we can help as a larger campus and not just have this work fall to a few people. You know, and keep kind of building. So any way we can help.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.